The Senate chamber was unusually full that morning. Cameras rolled. Reporters leaned forward. Everyone knew something was about to go down. Senator Ted Cruz, never one to shy away from the spotlight, had arrived early. His team had whispered for days that he planned to teach a lesson to one of the most vocal and fast-rising new stars in Congress, Representative Jasmine Crockett. Crockett, composed and confident as always, took her seat at the witness table. She wore a navy blue blazer, her signature calm energy radiating as she adjusted her mic. She wasn't rattled. She had heard the rumors too. But she came prepared. Senator Cruz leaned into his mic. His voice echoed across the chamber. "Representative Crockett, I think we've all seen your social media clips," he sneered. "And while those may get applause online, this is the United States Senate. We expect real substance here, not sound bites." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. But Jasmine? She didn't flinch. She gently placed her pen down, looked up at the senator, and smiled slightly, like someone who already knew how this was going to end. The silence following Cruz's jab lingered just long enough to be uncomfortable. All eyes turned to Jasmine Crockett, waiting to see if she'd lash out or fold under pressure. But instead, she calmly leaned forward and spoke into the mic with poise. "Thank you, Senator Cruz," she began, her tone measured. "I'm glad you brought up substance, because I was beginning to wonder when we were going to hear any." The chamber shifted. A few aides coughed to cover their reactions. Even a couple of senators raised their eyebrows. Cruz narrowed his eyes. "This isn't a comedy show, Representative," he snapped. "You're here to testify on legal oversight, not give a TED talk." Without missing a beat, Jasmine continued. "You're right again, Senator. So let's talk legal oversight. Specifically, why this committee continues to waste taxpayer dollars on partisan theatrics while ignoring issues your constituents are actually facing." A sharp intake of breath from someone in the back row. Cruz opened his mouth to interrupt, but Jasmine raised her hand slightly, a respectful gesture, and went on before he could speak. "I've reviewed the docket, Senator. Not one question on housing, education, or infrastructure. But plenty about my tone. My voice. My delivery. As if those things are more dangerous than actual policy failure." Her words were calm. Her gaze steady. Cruz, visibly agitated now, shuffled his notes. He hadn't expected her to stay this composed. And she wasn't done. "Is this about oversight, or optics, Senator?" Ted Cruz leaned in closer to his mic, voice slightly raised now. The room grew tenser with each syllable. "I think the American people deserve representatives who know the Constitution," he said with a smirk. "Not someone who plays courtroom drama on TikTok." A few awkward chuckles scattered through the audience. But Jasmine Crockett remained completely still, her fingers laced in front of her. When she finally responded, her tone dropped even lower, almost forcing the room to quiet down and lean in. "I appreciate the reminder, Senator," she said. "But I do in fact know the Constitution, deeply. I've sworn an oath to defend it multiple times." "Have you?" Cruz's smirk faltered slightly. "Because if we're comparing qualifications," she continued, "I spent years defending citizens against wrongful prosecutions. I've been in real courtrooms. I've written real briefs. And I've stood next to real people who didn't have cameras or platforms, just the law." Cameras clicked. Pens stopped moving. Even some of Cruz's own colleagues looked uneasy. Jasmine's gaze never left him. "Now if you'd like to talk about Article 1 powers, or federal oversight mechanisms, I'm happy to have that discussion. But if this is about putting on a show, I suggest we leave that to late-night television." The silence afterward was deafening. Even Cruz didn't have a quick comeback. Ted Cruz straightened in his chair, clearly rattled. He tapped his pen twice, then raised his voice, not shouting, but firm enough to try to reassert control. "You seem very confident, Representative Crockett. But I wonder, when was the last time you actually proposed legislation that passed? You talk about courtrooms and compassion, but this is the Senate. We deal in results. Crockett nodded slowly, as if she'd been waiting for that. I'm glad you brought that up, she said. Because results are exactly what I came here to discuss. She pulled a folder from the table, calmly opening it. This is the Community Reentry Bill I introduced last session. It passed committee with bipartisan support. You know why? Because unlike what we're doing here today, it was focused on solving problems, not scoring headlines. She flipped a page. This one, Support for Veterans Mental Health Services. Co-sponsored by members of both parties. Not flashy. Not viral. Just necessary. She glanced up again. And I'll happily compare my legislative record to yours, Senator, especially when it comes to delivering for working families. Cruz fidgeted. That's not the point, oh, but it is, she cut in smoothly. Because when you question my qualifications, what you're really doing is hoping people won't look at your own. Gasps. Audible ones this time. Jasmine sat back. But don't worry, Senator. I did. And the folder closed with a soft thud. Ted Cruz's face tightened as Jasmine Crockett gently slid the closed folder toward the edge of the table, letting it sit between them like a challenge. I took the liberty, she said evenly, of reviewing your voting record over the last 2 years. Cruz tried to wave her off. This isn't a hearing about me, no, it's not, she agreed calmly. But when someone questions my legitimacy in this room, I think it's only fair the public sees the full picture. She opened the folder again, this time revealing a printed spreadsheet. Clean. Highlighted. Documented. Let's talk about your votes against healthcare funding for rural communities, including in your own state. Or your silence on infrastructure bills that could have created thousands of jobs back home. She paused, just long enough to let the weight of it settle. You speak often about the Constitution, Senator. But what about duty? Cruz shifted in his seat, trying to respond, but Crockett wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't grandstanding. And that made her all the more dangerous. She leaned forward, quiet and firm. Texans deserve better than performance politics. And this committee deserves better than personal attacks in place of policy debates. Cruz's jaw tightened. His usual smirk, gone. Crockett looked directly at the chairman. I yield the remainder of my time. The chamber was dead silent. And for once, Ted Cruz had nothing to say. The chairman cleared his throat, clearly unsure how to move forward. The silence in the chamber hung thick, broken only by the soft scribbles of journalists rushing to capture every word. Ted Cruz stared down at his notes, but he wasn't reading them. His usual air of control had been cracked, publicly, and on record. Jasmine Crockett sat upright, composed, as if she'd just finished delivering a simple briefing. No triumph. No smugness. Just professionalism with teeth. Senator Booker leaned over and whispered something to a colleague, barely hiding a grin. Senator Warren, sitting a few seats down, gave a subtle nod toward Crockett, a silent acknowledgement of what had just happened. And then, the real firestorm began. Reporters scrambled to tweet the exchange. C-SPAN's live viewership numbers spiked. Clips were already being uploaded online with titles like, Crockett silences Cruz with one line, and, Legal Showdown in the Senate. Cruz tried to regain the floor. Chairman, I would like to respond, he said, voice thinner now. But the chairman glanced at the time and raised a hand. I believe Representative Crockett's time is concluded, and we're moving on to the next speaker. And just like that, the opportunity to recover vanished. Crockett turned slightly, exchanging a quiet thank you with the next witness before calmly gathering her notes. She stood, offered a polite nod to the panel, and walked out, without saying another word. Within an hour, the moment had gone viral. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's takedown aired across nearly every major news network. CNN called it the most controlled obliteration of a senator in recent memory. MSNBC labeled it a masterclass in composure under fire. Even some conservative outlets, while critical, couldn't deny the impact. In the clip, her line, "Is this about oversight, or optics, Senator?" had already become a trending quote on social media. Hashtag Crockett clapback, hashtag Senate showdown, hashtag calm crushed Cruz. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, flooded. Meanwhile, Ted Cruz's office went into damage control. His press secretary released a carefully worded statement that attempted to frame the exchange as spirited debate, but the video told a different story. Commentators from both sides of the aisle chimed in. One Republican strategist on cable news even admitted, "She walked in calm, left composed, and in between made Cruz look like he brought a Twitter argument to a constitutional hearing." Back in Crockett's office, her staff was unusually quiet as she entered. They stood. Then erupted in applause. But Jasmine? She just smiled and said, "Let's get back to work. The headlines won't fix the laws." The next morning, Senator Cruz walked into his office to a barrage of headlines, none of them flattering. Jasmine Crockett's calm dismantling of Cruz set Senate ablaze. Ted Cruz called for a fight, got buried in receipts instead. Crockett exposes Cruz's record in front of America. The senator's aides were frantic. Emails from donors, calls from media outlets, even murmurs from within his own party asking, "Why did you go after her like that? And why weren't you ready?" A junior staffer quietly entered his office and handed him a folder. "Morning coverage roundup, sir," she said, trying not to make eye contact. He flipped it open. The very image he tried to project, confident, commanding, in control, had been shredded. One clip had already hit 1 million views on YouTube. The title? Jasmine Crockett doesn't raise her voice, but she raises the bar. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, reporters camped outside Crockett's office hoping to get a comment. But her spokesperson issued a simple statement: Representative Crockett came to speak on policy, not participate in personal sparring. She's focused on the work her constituents elected her to do. No press tour. No victory lap. Just results. That only made her look stronger. Cruz, on the other hand, was left facing the music. His attempt to embarrass a rising leader had backfired, and now, even some of his allies were keeping their distance. By midday, the Senate corridors were buzzing. Other members, even those who typically kept their distance from House representatives, had started mentioning Jasmine Crockett's name in meetings with a new kind of respect. Not as a firebrand, but as a tactician. As someone who didn't just talk, she dismantled. An NPR reporter was overheard saying to her producer, "This wasn't just a viral moment. This was a shift." Meanwhile, lobbyists and policy analysts began re-evaluating their assumptions about Crockett. Her staff started receiving invites to panels, conferences, coalition briefings, many of which were usually reserved for longtime power players. In a closed-door lunch, one moderate senator leaned across the table to a colleague and said, "She didn't beat Cruz by yelling louder. She beat him by knowing more. That's what terrifies them." On social media, younger voters flooded comment sections with praise. Many said they felt represented for the first time. College students reposted clips with captions like, "This is how you handle a bully with a resume." But behind the scenes, Cruz's team scrambled to regain footing. A new op-ed was ghostwritten for him, meant to reframe the exchange as a healthy disagreement between branches. But no matter how it was spun, the damage had been done. A narrative had taken hold, and in Washington, perception is power. And Jasmine Crockett? She wasn't chasing the headlines. She was already back in committee, reviewing her next round of policy proposals. Because while Cruz had been looking for a fight, she had shown up to do the job. Later that week, Jasmine Crockett was invited to speak on a nationally televised policy forum. It wasn't entertainment. No fireworks. Just a panel of legal experts, lawmakers, and journalists discussing criminal justice reform. She spoke with clarity, precision and calm authority, referencing data, citing legal precedent, and proposing realistic solutions. The moderator even paused mid-show to say, "Representative Crockett, your command of the issues is, frankly, rare in this political climate." But while her stock was rising, Ted Cruz's misstep continued to haunt him. A satirical segment on late-night television showed a mock reenactment of the hearing, with Cruz portrayed as bumbling and red-faced while a calm Jasmine Crockett calmly handed him legal flashcards. It went viral. Again. Even more damaging. A Republican donor reportedly pulled funding from one of Cruz's PACs, citing a lack of strategic focus. Back on Capitol Hill, reporters tried to get a quote from Jasmine between meetings. "Do you have any comment on how the hearing played out, Congresswoman?" She paused, then offered the kind of answer that made headlines for all the right reasons. "My focus has always been justice, not drama. The people who sent me here didn't ask for soundbites, they asked for solutions." And with that, she stepped into an elevator and was gone. Later that evening, a trending headline summed up the moment: "Crockett isn't just the future, she's the standard." That Friday, a surprise came in the form of a letter. On official Senate letterhead, signed by a bipartisan group of senators, it invited Representative Jasmine Crockett to co-lead a joint working group on judicial oversight, something rarely offered to House members, especially freshmen. The reasoning? Demonstrated legal expertise, clarity under pressure, and a firm grasp of constitutional principles. Jasmine read it once, then twice. She wasn't one to chase praise, but she recognized the weight of what it meant. The room had changed. Meanwhile, news outlets began crafting new narratives. She was no longer just a sharp-tongued freshman with viral soundbites. She was a rising legal mind. A principled fighter. A force. And Ted Cruz. His next public appearance was met with hecklers quoting Jasmine's lines back to him. During a televised interview, a journalist asked bluntly, "Senator, do you regret provoking that exchange with Representative Crockett?" He dodged. He pivoted. He deflected. But everyone watching knew the truth: he'd underestimated her, and it cost him. Back in her office, Jasmine reviewed new policy drafts with her team. Her chief of staff noted the buzz online, the headlines, the donors suddenly reaching out. "You're kind of a star right now." Jasmine smiled faintly. "I didn't come here to be a star," she said. "I came to be a mirror, to show them what accountability actually looks like." And in that moment, even the walls of her office seemed to carry more weight. Weeks passed, but the impact of that Senate hearing didn't fade. Universities began referencing the exchange in political science courses. Law schools used it as a modern example of rhetorical discipline and constitutional clarity. One prominent professor even called it a landmark moment in congressional discourse. What began as an ambush attempt had become a defining turning point, not just for Jasmine Crockett's career, but for how young, principled leadership was viewed in Washington. Ted Cruz remained in the spotlight, but the tone had shifted. His aggressive tactics now faced more scrutiny. Colleagues became less eager to align themselves with his theatrics, wary of another public unraveling. Jasmine, meanwhile, kept her head down and her work ethic high. She introduced 2 new bills, one on judicial accountability, and another expanding legal aid in underserved communities. Both received bipartisan interest. And quietly, without any press conference, she was added to the short list of potential candidates for a future Senate seat. At a town hall in her district, a high school student stood up and asked, "How did you stay so calm when you were being attacked on national TV?" Jasmine paused, then replied, "Because I wasn't there to defend myself, I was there to represent everyone who's ever been talked down to, underestimated, or told they didn't belong. And I knew the truth would do the work for me." The crowd erupted into applause. And that was the legacy of that one hearing. It didn't end with a shout. It ended with a standard, and her name etched firmly beside it.